A bill that would allow prosecutors to seek the death penalty for women who get abortions in the state of Tennessee is not moving forward. That bill was sponsored by Jody Barrett, a House Republican from Dixon. Now, this would have amended Tennessee criminal law, allowing women who have an abortion to be punished with life in prison or death. It wouldn't only just punish a woman getting one, but any doctor or spouse who knew about this and helped.